All right. All right, recording. So what we did was essentially create, installed Django REST framework, Django JWT, created a route to token auth, which when we go to this and sign up or sign in a user, it responds with a token. Then we created a core Django app, and in here, in our serializers, we're gonna, anytime we create a user or log in a user, we want to send the username and ID back to the in the response. All right. But so this is just for a user serializer. So this is just what's being responded back. But we want to also be able to sign up a user. So when we sign up a user, we want to respond with a token as well as the username and ID, etc. So with that, we can create another class called user serializer with token. So that's just what it's called. Again, this is a model serializer like this one, but with this, we've got some additional methods, which I'm going to just copy this over, just kind of run through it. So this get token method uses this API settings, which essentially just grabs the token and then returns the token. And then this create method, so we're overriding the create user method because once we sign up a user and type in their password, we want to respond with that user's information. But we want to pop off the password because we don't want to send the password back to the front end. So that's what this is for. So we validate the data instance. If there is no password, we set that password to that user, and then we save that user to the database, and then we return that user instance back to in the response, but without the actual password. All right. So with that, now let's actually go into our views. And here we're going to import a lot of items. So I'm just going to copy all that stuff over here. So we're using HTTP response redirect. We're importing the built-in user model. We're from the REST framework. We're grabbing permissions, the status. We're grabbing some decorator, specifically the API view decorator, which essentially just says like, hey, what type of API do we need to access this specific method? We're using the response class, and we're using the API view class from the REST framework, and then we're just importing the serializers from the serializers file. So I'm just going to split the screens here, double click this. So from here, if we already have a logged in user, we can grab the current user from the database that's already logged in. So right here, so this API view, the decorator, and the type of HTTP request that this API decorator needs. So we're using a GET request to get the current user. So this determines the current user by their token and returns their data. So
hey, Tom.
Yep.
The token is going to be stored. That's going to be stored in the same table, I guess, as the user and the password, and so that's how the database is identifying the user here, or
no? So the token is stored on the server. It's not necessarily stored in the database.
Okay.
So we're not actively storing.
I guess I'm confused about the process of exactly like, you know, user creates account, server sends, you know, like they have a form, they click the create count button. Where's this token? The server then generates a token and does what with it from there?
It sends it back to the front end, but it stores it on the server. It doesn't necessarily store it in a database, I don't believe, because the token can expire.
Okay.
So it's just like stored in memory, and after a certain amount of time, it will expire. No, is that the correct as far as how the token works? I mean, there's there's a number of different ways you can store tokens, but yeah.
And then once the client has that token, that lives in their browser for the session or for how long?
It depends on how you configure it. Like you can store in local storage,
Okay.
but I think the default is like 5 minutes. So the token usually will expire after 5 minutes, but you can change that all in the settings. You can change that of how long you want that session or that token to persist.
But that's got, so the token living on the browser, if that's scraped by, a hacker, can they use just the token to use your session, or is that different than a session variable? Do they need other stuff besides the token?
Technically, I think they only need the token.
Okay. Got it.
So this will grab a current user that's logged in. So grabs the user serializer, comes into here, grabs the current user. And then the next one, we're going to grab, oh, that's not what we want. Here, we're going to create a, where is it? User list. Create a new class. Whoop. Just going to copy this over. Called user list, which inherits from the API view class that's in the views module within the REST framework. So this creates a new user called user list, because normally we'd have a get method here too for retrieving a list of user objects. So this permissions class allows us to access this route without having to pass in a token or without having a user to be authorized. So post, this creates a new user, initialize, make sure the user is valid by from the serializer, and then we save it, and then we response with the data with just some status code. This can be anything. We can literally say like status code 200 or 201 or whatever. Else, we just respond with our errors. All right. Any questions about that? So now let's go back to our URLs. And this is where we want to include our core app. So path, include, let's say core, and then include the URLs, or I'm sorry, the core apps.urls. And now in our core is where we'll actually want to create our urls.py. And let's come into here, copy this over. We don't really need a whole lot of this. So the only thing we really need is the path. And instead of all this stuff, let's actually get rid of that. We can grab the current user, which we'll actually call the current user method. We don't really necessarily need a named route here, like name current user. I mean, we can, but we're not actually going to be utilizing that. And then also we can grab the users. So just grab all the users, which will include the user list. And since this is a class-based view, we have to call it as view. And then we also have to import everything import the current user as well as the user list. Questions about that process? Kind of like what we're doing.
Can I see your project URLs again? Your
Project URLs. So this part,
yeah.
so we have the
Okay.
token auth, and then we have our actual URLs to our core app. All right. Next, we're going to create in our backend project, we're going to create a file called utils.py. And this utils file is literally just going to respond. So I'm going to put that in here. So this is, again, in our Django project. So when we actually log in to that token auth and it generates a token, we also want to respond back with our user and some user data. So we're going to respond back with our token as well as the user with our user serializer data that we're actually passing back. So if we go back to here, this is what's going to be responded back to with us, or this is what information about the user is going to be responded back when we sign up or sign in. And then finally, in our settings.py file, where'd it go? The very last thing, we want to pass in or create a JWT auth, which what we need here is the JWT response payload handler. And what we're going to call is the backend utils file. So the name of our project, the name of the file, which is the utils file, and then the name of the actual method that we're going to be calling. So this is the response payload that's going to be called for our JWT or JavaScript Web Token authorization. So now let's actually run this, Python manage.py, run server. Hopefully, cannot. Core serializers. Why not?
I think you have an extra E in serializers. Your serialize.
Oh, thank you. Serializers. Let's kill the server. What the hell just happened? Kill that. Clear that. Hopefully it works. All right, nothing bad happened. Go to token auth. Cool. So everything seems to be working so far. So now when I log in, hopefully this works. There we go. We get our token. And then our response payload handler sends back the user and the ID and the username. And that's all because of what's being passed here. I can also pass in like is staff as well. And if I refresh, you can keep on passing stuff back. All right. What questions do you have about the backend and generating a token? Nothing. All right, let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. and be back at 10:15, and we'll jump into the front end. So building out the front end and handling logins and signups.